The inheritance trap. The rain hadn't let up since dawn. Emma Blackwell stood in the muddy cemetery, her black umbrella trembling in the wind, her eyes fixed on the mahogany coffin being lowered into the earth. Arthur Blackwell, patriarch of the family, media tycoon, and man of impossible shadows, was finally being buried. But the chill creeping up her spine wasn't from the weather. It was from Daniel. Her husband of 6 years stood beside her, unmoved, his square jaw clenched, his gaze distant. He hadn't touched her hand all morning, not even as the priest read the final rites. To the world, it looked like grief, but Emma knew better. Arthur's death had awakened something in Daniel, something she didn't recognize. Back at the mansion, the reading of the will took place in Arthur's oak-paneled study, its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet drapes offering no comfort. A fire crackled faintly in the hearth, but it couldn't warm the room. The attorney, a pale man named Gregory Langley, cleared his throat and opened the thick envelope with a silver letter opener. "To my son Daniel Blackwell," he read, "I leave the entirety of the Blackwell estate, including all holdings, assets, and properties, valued at $800 million. Gasps echoed around the room. Emma felt her knees weaken. "To my daughter-in-law, Emma Blackwell," Langley paused. "I leave my gratitude for her loyalty." Emma blinked. That was it? Gratitude? The silence afterward was thunderous. Daniel didn't look at her. His fingers tapped rhythmically on the armrest of the antique chair as if waiting for something else. But there was no something else. Emma's face flushed. Gratitude. No home. No security. Not even a keepsake. Just thank you and goodbye. After the room cleared out, Emma cornered Daniel in the hallway. "Daniel, this has to be some mistake. He left me nothing?" He didn't flinch. His lips twitched into a faint, unreadable smile. "He left what he thought was deserved." Emma stared. "What does that mean?" But Daniel stepped past her, his voice low. "Pack what you need. You're leaving tonight." The words struck her like a slap. "Leaving? This is my home too." "No," he interrupted, still not looking at her. "It never was. You were temporary, convenient." Her mouth fell open. "You're serious." Deadly. He handed her a manila envelope. Inside, eviction papers, dated and signed. Effective immediately. "I suggest you go quietly," Daniel added, turning down the hall. "You've already taken enough." Emma stood frozen in place, disbelief warring with humiliation. 6 years of marriage, gone in a breath. The man she thought she knew had become a stranger overnight. She left that night, dragging 2 suitcases down the rain-slicked driveway, past the iron gates of the Blackwell estate. The mansion behind her loomed like a tomb, silent and impenetrable. In her chest, a storm churned fiercer than the one overhead. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. And though she didn't know it yet, Arthur Blackwell's death was only the beginning. Emma hadn't slept. Her body lay curled up on a narrow futon in her friend Celia's apartment, but her mind remained trapped inside the Blackwell estate, trying to understand what had just happened to her. In less than 24 hours, she had buried her father-in-law, watched her husband inherit $800 million, and been kicked to the curb like a forgotten accessory. She stared at the ceiling fan above her, its slow, hypnotic spin failing to calm the ache in her chest. She kept replaying Daniel's words over and over. "You were temporary. Convenient." She didn't cry. Not yet. The betrayal hadn't sunk deep enough to reach the part of her that could cry. She was still in shock. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Unknown caller. 6:21 a.m. She hesitated before answering. "Hello?" Static. Then a sharp, shaking breath. "Emma?" Daniel's voice. But something was wrong. He sounded broken, wild. Not the cold, composed man who'd thrown her out the day before. "Daniel?" she whispered, sitting upright. "What's going on?" His voice came through in fragments, like he was speaking from a tunnel. I think he's still alive," she froze. What? Who? Arthur, he rasped. I saw him last night. He was standing in the hallway. His reflection. In the mirror. Emma's skin prickled. Daniel, are you drunk? Are you? No, I wasn't imagining it. He said something. I couldn't hear the words, but his lips moved. His breath quickened. I think he's watching me. I think he's here. Where are you? She asked, gripping the phone tighter, but the line went dead. Emma stared at the screen. Call ended. Panic tugged at her ribs. Something wasn't right. Whether it was guilt, paranoia, or something stranger, Daniel wasn't just spiraling, he was unraveling. Against her better judgment, she pulled on jeans and boots and slipped out before Celia woke. The Blackwell estate loomed ahead an hour later, just as imposing and silent as the night she left it. Morning mist clung to the hedges. No cars were in the driveway. No sign of Daniel. She approached the front door, half expecting security to stop her, but the gate was ajar. The house was unlocked. She stepped into the foyer. The air felt wrong, heavier. Daniel? She called out. No answer. She walked toward Arthur's study. The door creaked open under her fingers, and her breath caught. The room had been ransacked. Books tossed to the floor, drawers hanging open, glass shattered across the rug. The antique globe in the corner lay on its side like a fallen soldier. And then she saw it. Arthur's grand oil portrait, once mounted above the fireplace, was still there. But someone had taken a blade to it. A single, violent slash ran straight through his face. Emma stepped closer, her stomach twisting. Paint flakes dusted the floor like ash. Daniel wasn't lying. Something had happened in here. Something unhinged. A sudden chill swept through the room, as if the house had exhaled. And for a brief second, Emma swore she saw a shape in the mirror behind the desk. A figure, standing still, watching. She turned sharply. Nothing. But her reflection stared back at her, alone. And suddenly, she wasn't sure what was worse, being thrown out of the Blackwell legacy or being pulled right back into it. Emma sat in the quiet corner of a cafe across town, a cup of untouched coffee cooling between her palms. Her fingers trembled as she stared down at the crisp copy of Arthur Blackwell's will she'd managed to obtain from a clerk at Langley and Frost, the firm handling the estate. The man had slipped it to her with a look of pity, or fear, she wasn't sure which. The pages fluttered in her hands as she flipped past the now familiar lines. The $800 million left to Daniel, the poetic gratitude extended to her, and stopped when she reached a page she hadn't seen before. Addendum C, executable only upon contested claim. Her eyes narrowed. The entire page was written in Arthur's tight, slanted handwriting, scanned and sealed with the firm's crimson watermark. But it hadn't been read aloud during the will reading. She was certain of it. Emma read the lines aloud under her breath. Should there be any legitimate challenge to the terms of this document by a surviving heir, the inheritance shall be considered temporarily frozen, pending an appearance and sworn testimony by the witness known as S.R. A failure to locate or produce said witness within 90 days shall result in forfeiture of contestation rights. She blinked. S.R.? It wasn't a name, just two initials. No further details. No explanation of their connection to Arthur or the estate. But something about it sparked a distant memory. Arthur once muttering something about a broken line that should have stayed buried. She didn't know what it meant then. Now, she wasn't so sure. Just as she began to reread the clause, her phone lit up with a new message. Unknown sender. Stop digging. You don't belong in the will. Her heart hammered. She looked around the cafe instinctively. No familiar faces. But someone was watching. That afternoon, she returned to the estate attorney's office, armed with questions. Gregory Langley didn't greet her with his usual courteous detachment. His eyes darted around the lobby before quietly ushering her into his office and locking the door. I shouldn't be speaking to you without Daniel's approval, he said, lowering his voice. But I'll say this. You're not the only one who's asked about Addendum C. Emma leaned forward. Who else? Langley hesitated, then pulled out a folder from his drawer. Last week, before the funeral, someone broke into our archives. They only stole one file. He slid a photocopy across the desk. It was the same addendum, but written across the top in red ink was a note. SR must never surface. If she does, the legacy collapses. Emma's skin prickled. She? Langley didn't answer. Instead, he leaned in and whispered, Be careful. Someone is trying to erase the Blackwell history. Entire chapters. Names. Documents. As if they never existed. Outside the window, a dark sedan idled at the curb. Emma saw it reflected in the glass just before it sped away. Her thoughts spun. Arthur's mysterious addendum, the initials SR, the slashed painting, Daniel's unraveling. None of this was coincidence. The Blackwell inheritance wasn't just money, it was a cover-up, a trap wrapped in gold. And if SR ever came to light, someone was willing to do anything to make sure she disappeared again, forever. The Blackwell greenhouse stood at the far end of the estate, nearly forgotten behind a crumbling stone wall wrapped in ivy. Emma hadn't set foot there in years. It had always felt off. The air around it seemed heavier, the glass panes always slightly fogged, even in the summer heat. Arthur used to vanish there for hours, days, sometimes, emerging with soil-stained hands and a vacant stare. Today, it was silent. Overgrown vines clawed at the door, and shattered pots littered the ground like tiny graves. Emma stepped inside, brushing away webs that clung to the frame. The scent of damp earth and decay filled her nostrils. Broken glass crunched beneath her boots. She wasn't sure why she'd come here. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was because this was the last place Daniel hadn't completely desecrated. But then, she heard it. A faint thud beneath her feet. Then another. Slow. Rhythmic, like footsteps, coming from below. She froze. There wasn't supposed to be a basement here. The greenhouse had no foundation on the estate plans she'd studied. And yet, she crouched near an old tool bench and noticed a sliver of space between the floorboards. Kneeling, she brushed away dirt and broken roots. And there it was, a handle. Rusted, hidden. Heart pounding, she yanked it up. A section of the floor groaned open, revealing a narrow wooden staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose from below was ice cold, and smelled like mildew and something metallic. For a long moment, she just stood there, listening. Then she heard a voice, not quite a word, just a low murmur. A breath. Grabbing a lantern from the bench, she descended the stairs, each creak louder than the last. At the bottom, a hallway stretched before her, stone walls, lined with old gas lamps and wires that hadn't been touched in decades. At the end was a metal door, dented and rusted at the hinges. She pushed it open. Inside was a room no larger than a prison cell. Blank walls, a cot, a bucket, and a man, hunched in the corner, long hair hanging in greasy ropes, his skin pale as paper. He turned slowly at the sound of her steps. Who are you? Emma whispered, the words catching in her throat. The man stood, unsteady. His eyes were glassy, bloodshot but alert. Haunted. I should ask you the same, he rasped. You're not one of them. Emma stepped back instinctively. Who are you? He studied her face for a long moment. Then, with a bitter, knowing smile, he said, I'm Stephen Blackwell, Arthur's firstborn, the one he tried to erase. Emma's mouth parted in disbelief. That's not possible. You're dead. So they told you, he said, voice low and sharp. Arthur told everyone that. But I'm very much alive, and if you think Daniel is the only heir, He stepped forward, chains clinking softly at his ankle. "Then you have no idea what you've stumbled into." The lantern in her hand flickered. Stephen's eyes glinted in the dim light, and for the first time since Arthur's funeral, Emma felt something stronger than fear. She felt the story unraveling. Emma hadn't returned to the greenhouse since discovering Stephen, nor had she told anyone he was alive, not even Daniel, whose voicemails had become increasingly erratic, punctuated by paranoid whispers and long silences. Instead, Emma stayed locked inside the estate's east wing, the one Arthur had kept shuttered for years. Dust coated the banisters, and old velvet drapes had fossilized into brittle folds. No one ventured there. Not staff, not family, not even Arthur when he was alive. It was where Rosalind used to stay. Rosalind? The name had surfaced in whispers from Stephen's mouth, spoken like a curse and a memory. She was the only light in that house, Stephen had told her through the basement bars, his voice trembling. And he smothered it. Emma had always assumed Rosalind was a former employee, maybe a distant cousin, one of the many secrets Arthur kept buried. But Stephen said otherwise. She was his mistress, the love of his life, and she vanished in 1989. They said she drowned, but I saw her the night before she disappeared, crying in the garden. She said Arthur had done something unforgivable, that he had a plan, that she had to hide everything. Now, Emma was determined to find out what that meant. She scoured the East Wing bedroom, prying open drawers, lifting loose floorboards, searching every inch of the cracked, peeling wallpaper. For hours, she found nothing, just moth-eaten clothes and perfume bottles long gone dry. But in the closet, behind a false panel, Emma discovered a narrow cavity in the wall. Inside was a small locked box, bound in leather and stained with age. It took her nearly 20 minutes with a hairpin to crack the lock. Inside were letters. Dozens of them, all addressed from Rosalind. And at the very bottom, a leather-bound journal, the cover embossed only with the letter R. Emma sat on the floor, her hands shaking as she opened the first page. January 2nd, 1988. He says, "I'll be safe here." But I don't believe him anymore. He watches me when he thinks I'm sleeping. He speaks to the walls like they're listening. I fear I've seen the real Arthur now, and it's not a man. It's a machine. Cold. Calculating. Obsessed. He thinks the child will fix everything. That blood can undo betrayal. But I can't raise a child in this darkness. I have to get out. Emma's blood ran cold. A child? She flipped through more entries. Rosalind spoke in riddles at times, of fear, of legacy, of Arthur's grand design. But the theme was always the same. She was terrified. And she was pregnant. March 19th, 1989. I've chosen a name. If it's a girl, I'll call her Emma. He'll never guess. Never know. That will be my revenge. Emma dropped the book. Her name, written decades ago by a woman who shouldn't have known she existed. Her heart pounded as she fumbled through more pages, her mind spinning, trying to make sense of it. Had Arthur known all along? Was she the child Rosalind had spoken of? Or worse, was she never supposed to know the truth at all? The last page of the journal held a single haunting sentence. If you're reading this, he failed to bury us completely. The knock on Daniel's penthouse door echoed like a warning. Emma hadn't seen him face to face since the funeral, since the eviction, since the man who had once whispered love in her ear turned cold enough to cut her from his life like a forgotten guest. But now she wasn't here as a wife. She was here as someone who had started to remember who she really was. The door swung open. Daniel looked wrecked, pale, unshaven. Dark circles sank beneath his eyes, and his once tailored clothes hung loose, wrinkled. "Emma," he rasped, "you shouldn't be here." "I know," she replied, stepping past him. "But you're not the only one who's been losing sleep." Inside, the apartment was a mess. papers everywhere, mirrors covered with cloths, empty bottles on the counter. He was unraveling. And it made her feel a dangerous sympathy. "I found Rosalind's journal," she said, setting it on the marble table between them. "I know about her. And the baby." Daniel stared at the book, his expression hardening. "You read that?" "I read everything," she said softly, including the part where she said she was going to name the child Emma. Daniel didn't move, but his jaw twitched. "I want to know the truth," she said. "Not just about Rosalind. About us." For a moment, silence stretched between them like a blade. Then Daniel exhaled and turned away, walking to the window overlooking the city. "You want the truth?" he said, voice hollow. "Fine, but don't expect it to feel good." Emma waited, heart pounding. "My father, Arthur, chose my bride. He always said legacy had to be protected, even if that meant crafting it from the ground up. He told me he'd disinherit me if I married for ambition or emotion. He said the only suitable wife was someone with no past, no ties, no risk of scandal." Daniel turned to face her. "That was you, Emma." She recoiled. "So you married me for the will?" "I married you for survival," he snapped. "You were perfect. No known family, no connections. Just a quiet woman with a gentle heart and no power to claim anything. You were convenient." Emma's hands trembled. "And all those years? What were they? Lies?" Daniel faltered. For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. Regret. Or maybe just fear. "I didn't plan to feel anything," he admitted. "But somewhere along the way, I think I started to care. That's why it got messy. That's why I pushed you out." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "And you think that makes it better?" Daniel's voice dropped to a whisper. "You don't know what my father did, what he built, what he hid. There are people, watchers, who don't want the truth coming out. They've been following me. They're waiting for something. And now they're watching you too." Emma stepped back. "What are you talking about?" Daniel looked at her, truly looked at her, like he was seeing her for the first time. "Rosalind didn't just disappear. She was erased, and if you're her daughter, you may be next." His phone buzzed on the table. A message flashed briefly across the screen before disappearing. "She's found the journal. Clean it up." Emma stared at it. So did Daniel. And in that moment, they both realized whatever Arthur had started wasn't over. It had only just begun. The sterile white walls of the hospital room felt colder than the autumn wind outside. Emma sat rigid in the plastic chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes fixed on the pale figure lying in the bed before her. "Daniel." His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, a tangle of tubes snaking from his arms, monitoring machines beeping steadily in the background. The man who had once wielded millions in power now looked fragile, like a man fighting for every second he had left. It had happened so fast. Only hours after their tense conversation, Daniel had collapsed in the lobby of a downtown hotel. Paramedics called it a sudden seizure. Doctors suspected a neurological incident. But Emma knew better. Something darker was at play. The hospital's lead toxicologist had confirmed her fears. Daniel's bloodstream contained traces of a rare neurotoxin, one so potent it could paralyze the nervous system and mimic a stroke. And the toxin? It was the same poison rumored to have killed Arthur's housekeeper years ago, an incident long dismissed as an accident. Emma felt bile rise in her throat. Arthur's ghost wasn't just haunting the estate. It was poisoning the present. Back at the estate, the basement where Stephen had once been hidden was eerily silent. Emma had returned earlier that day to search for clues but found the space empty. Stephen was gone. Had he fled? Or was he taken? Her phone vibrated. A message flashed across the screen from an unknown number. "Stay away, or you'll be next." Emma's fingers trembled as she deleted the message. Whoever was behind this was closing in. Later that evening, she returned to the hospital, desperate to find Daniel conscious. But when she reached his bedside, his eyes fluttered open only briefly before closing again. In that fleeting moment, his voice was barely audible. "They're watching." Emma leaned closer. "Who's watching, Daniel? You have to fight?" His gaze sharpened, the fog lifting for a heartbeat. "The Watchers, the legacy. It's not over." Then his eyes slipped shut again. Emma's mind raced. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but the picture was growing darker. Arthur's death, Daniel's inheritance, Stephen's return, Rosalind's journal, all threads in a web spun decades ago. But who was orchestrating this deadly game? And what did they want with her? Later, alone in the quiet of her temporary apartment, Emma pulled out the journal again. Her fingers traced the worn leather cover, and her heart clenched. She was no longer just a victim or an outsider. She was the key, the heir who had been hidden, hunted, and nearly erased. And now, with Daniel's life hanging in the balance, Emma knew the stakes had never been higher. Because the poison was not only in Daniel's veins, it was in the very bloodline of the Blackwell legacy. The chill in the air wasn't just from the creeping fog that had settled over the estate, it was something deeper, a presence that Emma could feel crawling beneath her skin. Since Daniel's hospitalization, the world had shifted beneath her feet. Every shadow seemed to move on its own. Every whisper of wind carried a warning. Her phone vibrated again. Anonymous message. "You're next." Emma stared at the screen, heart pounding. The message was simple, but the threat was unmistakable. Whoever was watching her was closing in. And they weren't bluffing. Determined not to be caught off guard, Emma returned to the Blackwell estate under the cover of night. The mansion loomed like a silent sentinel, its windows glinting coldly in the moonlight. She moved quickly through the halls, her footsteps muffled by thick Persian rugs. Every creak of the floorboards echoed like a gunshot. In the old library, she pulled aside a heavy velvet curtain and found a wall panel loose behind the shelves. Her fingers fumbled, and with a quiet click the panel swung open. Behind it was a bank of surveillance monitors. Emma's breath caught. The room was filled with screens, each displaying a different part of the estate. Hallways, staircases, the garden, even her own bedroom. Her eyes scanned the monitors. Faces she didn't recognize appeared and vanished, lurking in shadows, watching, waiting. The cameras weren't just passive eyes. Some had speakers, some were connected to motion sensors. It was a fortress of surveillance. And the watchers weren't just ghosts of the past. They were very much alive. Emma's fingers trembled as she tapped on a monitor labeled "Study." The screen flickered and then froze. There, caught on tape, was a startling image. Arthur Blackwell, unmistakably alive, walking through the estate. But this footage was dated 2 weeks after his official death. Her heart pounded. Had Arthur faked his death, or was this some twisted trick? As she continued watching, the image of Arthur vanished abruptly, replaced by static, then a chilling message scrolling across the screen. "Imposters will be erased." Emma's breath hitched. She wasn't just fighting for an inheritance anymore, she was fighting for her life. Suddenly, a faint noise behind her. Emma spun around. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified, a whisper in the dark. Footsteps in the hall. The watchers had come out of the shadows, and they were closer than ever. Emma backed away from the monitors, heart racing. She knew the truth now. Arthur Blackwell had built more than a fortune. He had built an army, an invisible network of loyalists, watchers, tasked with protecting his secrets, and they were determined to keep the Blackwell legacy pure. At any cost, the battle for the truth had entered a new, terrifying phase. And Emma was standing in the middle of the storm. The old grandfather clock in the Blackwell estate's drawing room had always been a silent witness to family secrets. Its pendulum swung rhythmically, a steady heartbeat amid the storm of deceit. Emma stood before it, her fingers tracing the intricate woodwork, her breath shallow. Earlier that day, while exploring the estate under a veil of twilight, she had discovered a hidden compartment nestled inside the clock's base. Inside lay a dusty leather folder, Arthur Blackwell's final confession. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the brittle pages. The script was unmistakably his, sprawling, jagged letters that seemed to claw their way onto the paper. To whoever finds this, the truth must be known before it's too late. I never told Daniel the whole story. The child I feared and tried to erase is not who he believes her to be. She is my daughter, Rosalind's daughter. Emma. She was hidden in plain sight, the heir I buried to protect the name I destroyed. But the truth will rise. The legacy is hers, not his. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Her own name, inked by the hand of the man who had condemned her to shadows, now illuminated her existence with brutal clarity. She wasn't just a pawn in this inheritance game. She was the rightful heir. But if the confession was real, it meant the nightmare wasn't over. Whoever had tried to silence Rosalind, whoever had hunted Stephen, whoever had threatened her, knew the truth too. Because now, Emma had become the target. Back in her temporary refuge, Emma sat at her laptop, the screen glowing with the latest DNA test results she'd rushed to obtain in secret. 2 strands of hair, hers and a sample from the estate's private archive labeled Rosalind Blackwell, had been tested. The match was undeniable. She was Rosalind's daughter, the bastard child, the one Arthur had tried to bury. A sudden knock on the door jolted her from her thoughts. Heart hammering, Emma peered through the peephole. No one was there, but on the doorstep lay a small, sealed envelope. Inside, a single card with one word written in crimson ink: stop. Emma swallowed hard. She was running out of time. Her phone buzzed. A video message from an unknown number. The screen flickered, revealing a grainy silhouette. A voice distorted, but the words were clear. You don't belong here. Walk away or suffer the fate of those who defied us. The line went dead. Emma's resolve hardened. If she walked away now, she'd lose everything. But if she stayed, the dangers lurking in the shadows would only grow. The Blackwell estate was more than a home. It was a battleground. And she was ready to fight. The Blackwell estate stood silent under the heavy clouds, its vast silhouette a looming fortress against the gathering storm. Emma's breath came in shallow gasps as she crossed the grand marble foyer once more, this time not as a visitor, but as the rightful heir determined to reclaim what was hers. But the house had changed. Or rather, it had revealed its true face. Behind the heavy oak doors, the walls seemed to pulse with secrets. Hidden passageways clicked open, like jaws ready to snap shut. The estate was no longer a home. It was a labyrinth, one engineered by Arthur Blackwell himself to protect his final will. A cold voice crackled from unseen speakers. Welcome, Emma. We've been expecting you. Her skin prickled with unease. This was no accident. The house was alive, programmed to enact Arthur's twisted final plan if the rightful heir dared to step forward. The floor beneath her feet shifted suddenly, and a section slid away, revealing a trapdoor leading into the depths below. With no choice, Emma descended. In the flickering torchlight of the hidden chambers, she faced the last survivors of the Blackwell Watchers, Stephen, Daniel, and shadowy figures cloaked in darkness. Did you really think it would be that easy? Stephen's voice was a low growl. The legacy isn't just money, it's control. Daniel's eyes, haunted and wary, met hers. We've all been pawns in Arthur's game. Betrayal twisted through the air. Suddenly the doors slammed shut. Metal bars slid down, trapping them inside. Arthur's voice echoed through the chamber. The true heir must prove herself worthy. A series of deadly puzzles and traps unfolded, each designed to test Emma's resolve, intelligence, and heart. In one chamber, illusions forced her to confront painful memories of betrayal, loss, and love. In another, she faced physical dangers that pushed her to the brink. Each challenge stripped away the facade of the Blackwell legacy, revealing its rotten core. At the climax, Emma discovered a secret vault containing documents, proof of Arthur's crimes, Stephen's innocence, and Daniel's coerced complicity. But as she reached for the papers, a shadowy figure lunged. It was one of the Watchers, loyal to Arthur's last breath, determined to end the bloodline. Emma fought back fiercely, adrenaline surging through her veins. In the final moments, Daniel sacrificed himself to save her, revealing his love was real, despite everything. Stephen, seeing the truth, turned against the Watchers, helping Emma escape the deadly maze. Emerging into the stormy night, Emma clutched the evidence. The Blackwell empire would be exposed, its dark secrets laid bare. But the cost had been steep. She looked back once, the mansion's windows glowing ominously. Arthur's trap had almost claimed her. But Emma was alive. And she was free.